Hi, I'm Ruggero from One Foot in the Dome, and today I have a very interesting question sent to me by Eric Zaman. So Eric writes, what are your thoughts on heightened performances, i.e. roles which on the surface may appear to be more eccentric and over the top for screen roles compared to stage roles which typically give actors more leeway? That's an excellent question, Eric. Thank you so much for sending it over. Now, I think this is particularly interesting because actors especially tend to be obsessed with this idea of being natural. Especially on screen, there's this fear of overacting, fear of basically looking stupid, looking unnatural, which is, yeah, it's important and it's understandable. You have to look natural whilst you do this. And especially on camera, we always go for extreme naturalism. And this is, I think, one of the main differences between stage and screen. On stage, things tend to be quite often, not always, but quite often more heightened. Whereas on screen is different. We tend to go always for extreme naturalism. I'm not talking about in general, like movies. Okay, of course we have horror, we have sci-fi, we have things that are clearly not natural. I'm talking about the style of acting. Okay, on the stage, very often we have heightened styles of acting. We go from extremes like, commedia dell'arte or Beijing opera, or things which are extremely stylized, Cirque du Soleil, for example, to, way less heightened, as we go. One Man, Two Governors springs to mind. Any kind of musical tends to be obviously heightened, not just when they sing, but usually it's also heightened in the way they portray the characters with the physicality and stuff. This is especially noticeable and more common when it comes to comedy in general. Screen instead is different. On screen, again, with the comedy we tend to have something a bit more animated, but even those, they tend to be more naturalistic in general. So that is sort of one of the main differences between the two. Now, this is interesting to talk about because I think the most memorable characters on the screen are those that we define as more theatrical. Those that are not just natural. Those interpretations which are over the top, that go, Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada, Anthony Hopkins in Hannibal, so Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow. Those are the ones that really stand out and we really remember. But if we were to look at them objectively, they are over the top. They are not just natural per se. There's more to them. And that's fine. That's good. That's why I've said it very often in other videos. I don't think the ultimate goal for actors should be to be natural. Not at all. I think the ultimate goal should be to be engaging, to be entertaining, to be interesting. Being natural is the baseline. Yes, you have to look natural within the style of what you're doing. And this is where things get a bit complicated. What we define as natural is not a fixed concept. Think about comedies, okay? Comedies are easier to identify. So let's think about something like Scrubs, for example. So something that is very heightened, or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, for example, okay? Those are realities that are heightened. They're not our reality. It's not our own everyday life. Everything is already a bit heightened. Being natural for those characters, so for the actors who play those characters, means actually being already a bit above real life in terms of how big their reactions are, how their physicality works, how the whole interpretation is created, basically, right? So being natural means fitting within that style. Okay, so if let's say the Brooklyn Nine-Nine reality it's up here, we look at something like True Detective, okay, and it's way below here. It's it's a way lower in no intensity, so it's how heightened it is. It's not heightened, it's below. And yet we look at True Detective, and the character that Matthew McConaughey plays, I think you could say that he is not over the top, but he's not just natural. He's extremely interesting. His reactions are sometimes over the top, but it works. It works within that reality. So he has this baseline of he knows what he's doing and he naturally fits into that reality, but then he spikes out of it because he is more interesting than that. The same thing with Jack Sparrow. The Jack Sparrow reality is already a bit heightened from the True Detective one. It's not all the way up to Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but it's kind of in between, if you like. Jack Sparrow spikes out from that reality quite a bit, to the point that some people might say he sticks out. It almost doesn't look like he fits into that reality. I don't agree. I think he does. I just think he's a very peculiar person who lives in that reality. So the tricky thing is to make sure that you do something which is interesting, is bigger, is more noticeable, more engaging, but which still feels as if it's part of the reality you're working in. One example that I remember some people criticized for sticking out, for not looking like she was part of the reality, is Elizabeth Banks in the Power Rangers movie. Yes, I watched the Power Rangers movie and I enjoyed it because it's fun. That is quite a heightened reality, although acting style-wise, it's fairly naturalistic. It's not as understated as other things, so again, a midway thing, but it is fairly naturalistic. Elizabeth Banks' interpretation, however, it does jar. It does feel a bit too much, a bit over the top. You can argue it might make sense for the character because she's playing an alien in that movie, so ultimately she is out of that world, but it does, the interpretation does jar a little bit. So you can argue whether you like it or not, but that is sort of the one thing to think about. So how can you fit into the reality and still create something interesting? I think a lot of this has to do with allowing yourself as an actor, or if you're a director, sort of pushing your actors, allowing your actors to find things which are more interesting, which are, sometimes a bit over the top, sometimes even a bit theatrical, but they still work within the reality, the baseline reality that you're working into. There's no one size fits all rules. As always, it is a matter of opinion. It is a matter of personal taste. Some people don't like anything that is in any way heightened. They want everything to be absolutely baseline, understated, and super real. Most people don't. Most people love sci-fi. Most people love fantasy, or whatever. I love that stuff. Comedies as well. So most people like heightened things. So I think if you're an actor, especially, you can't be over obsessed with this idea of being natural at all costs, because you need to fit in with what the movie style is. So if it is heightened, that you need to fit into that heightened state. Otherwise, you will stick out in the other way. Do you know what I mean? Imagine Brooklyn Nine-Nine or Scrubs, and imagine a character that all of a sudden comes in and acts as if he was in a True Detective episode. It wouldn't work. It would feel weird. It would feel out of place, So let me know what you think, guys. As I said, it's a very complex topic. Thank you very much, Eric, for sending it my way. Let me know what you guys think. And as always, if you have any requests for other topics you'd like me to talk about, leave a comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when I post a new video. Thank you so much. Bye bye.